Welcome to episode 6 of the Into the Indies podcast. Today's guests are the devs of my personal game of the year 2021. We have creative lead Geri Macsai and head of the studio Gabor Szutorisz. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Hello. Thanks for inviting us. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to have you here. I didn't do this intro just for the sake of it. I literally followed. I told you a bit before we started recording. I followed your project since early days, before the FIG campaign happened. It was right around the time I started my Twitter. So I saw you somewhere in there, and being a huge RPG and TTRPG fan as well, I immediately was like, okay, this seems like the game for me. So I'm really excited to have this discussion today and get to the nitty-gritty of stuff.
Alrighty. Sounds intriguing.
So let's start from the real beginning. Let's start with you, Geri. What would you say would be a game or a video game that made you think, okay, this is something that I would like to pursue? I like this really much.
Oof. I guess the first video game that I ever played, which sounds like a cop out, but no. We really got into video games as far back as primary school, I think. Around the age of like 6, 7, 8 for me. I was watching my dad play video games and then got into them myself. But the idea to actually get into game development came, for me, much later. And that's because I think back in the 80s and the 90s, when we were in school, Gabor and I, as we were schoolmates for a while, at least, there was no real way to get into game development. There was no formal training. Most people, at least in Hungary, but I think pretty much around the world as well, it was a more like a sort of like an entrepreneurial or a more like a Wild West, right? Like people like, oh, let's make a video game, and of course there were big studios and stuff, but it was more of an uncharted sort of realm. And here in Hungary, there was no real. There were some people who were into that, usually coders who got into making video games. It seemed like unattainable for me, so I never really thought about it. And I got into other creative projects. I was really heavily, I was really heavy into RPGs, like tabletop RPGs, and that's where the love for game design came from, because you really have to design a lot of stuff as a GM, because I was always the game master, for better or worse. And so world building, game design came from that for me. And later on, as I was still a big fan of video games, I kept like thinking in my 20s, like how cool it would be to get into video game development. But even then, it seemed to me, at least, a far-fetched idea. And then I think in my 30s, I started thinking about, could I actually take part in some meaningful way in game development? And then my sort of window into that was definitely the English language. I was English major at university. I studied literature and history and other things in English, and of course the language itself. But by the time you get to university, you're more like, you're not really learning English, you're learning stuff in English. So that's where I thought, maybe I could, maybe I could try something. And then I did end up getting into as a consultant and a writer on various games, but it was not a simple thing, and it never for a long time it never occurred to me that I should really try to sort of move into this career, even though now looking back on it, it's just it's madness. Like, why not? This was always supposed to be the thing. So yeah, pretty crazy.
How about you, Gabor? How did you think? Okay, this is something that might you might like to pursue.
Well, it took me a while as well, just like Geri. I remember we had discussions. I think it was already in our 30s when we were like, oh, there is this setting. We enjoy so much playing pen and paper on this world, in this world. And like, what could we do with this? And we were like, maybe create just a setting book or a table, like a board game. But even then, it wasn't really like go for a video game that was just too far fetched. I as well entertained the idea and even went to like career advice of like, okay, could I get into game development? I was working at multinationals in finance and IT roles, and it was just too big of sideways steps, and so I didn't pursue it at the time. And then there came a time when I was just switching between companies, and I thought, okay, let's give a pause, take some time. I dedicated 1 month to just crunch the numbers. Could we do this? I had some savings. We knew that we have a really strong setting that's a good starting base, because like we knew what we were gonna build our game on. Even then, for a bit of time, we were entertaining, is it board game or video game? But we quickly realized that we had no idea about physical production, how to actually order the stuff from China, and we would have to really almost finish it by the time to Kickstarter. So, okay, let's go video game. And so I looked at games that came out just before that, and then what was the team size, what was their strategy in terms of crowdfunding campaign, their success, and so on. And we divided that with, I don't know, times. So we never thought we would be a Sunless Sea or Darkest Dungeon. We kept our thinking modest, but something that is enough for us to keep going, because we wanted to commit to this long term. And yeah, so we were really at even a bit after 33. So like we had this moment of, okay, now or never. We could still do this. Had enough savings to fund the first part of it, and then we will involve some investors maybe, or crowdfunding and so on. That was the plan, and gave us ourselves 2 years. Like we will make or break it, and then we would not die not trying, right? We would know for sure that at least we gave it a shot. And then it turned out good, right? People resonated with the game, with the setting. They really liked the grittiness of it and how we approached immersion, prioritized immersion over just modern day game design elements of constantly rewarding players. We did not go that direction, but just kept true to the setting. And we made it work.
Let's take a step back before we get to the nitty-gritty of the video game. First of all, just a parenthesis, and also for the listeners, it's funny that I heard two of my favorite video games in there, Sunless Sea and Darkest Dungeon, and right now I'm wearing a Darkest Dungeon t-shirt, by the way, taking this interview.
Looks great.
Yeah. One of the first things that made your project unique, in my eyes, when I first saw it around, I would say, early 2018. We had an interview actually early 2018. It's around the time I opened Twitter, and it was on one of the first ever projects I followed up. Funnily enough, alongside Road Warden, if you're aware of it. Both of those projects were really directly captivating from an art style level, have a grittiness, have a medieval structure that really appealed to me. And you have been, as you already over this first 10 or so minutes of this interview, you've already mentioned a lot of times that this was an already built world from a tabletop RPG campaign you've been running. As a dungeon master myself over many years now, 3.5 D&D, 5 D&D. Right now I've been running 6 years worth of Cyberpunk Red. You might not be able to see it. My camera is a bit weird. For those who are not listening, we have some cameras on here. I've also had, I'm planning on running some One Ring second edition at some point, hopefully, but we'll see. First question, and simplest one. What system were you running this campaign in?
Various things, because what has turned into the Riven Realms after or through decades of iterations and building and removing and rethinking and whatnot, was really something fairly simple in the beginning, and we just sort of I became the GM for the group of kids that we were, and we were really into fantasy. This is the late 80s, I think, early 90s, and so we had the fighting fantasy books, and we sort of began like doing our own thing, which was very similar. And then I started drawing maps and stuff. So initially, I think we had some like really janky, like messy sort of system that we kind of based on the fighting fantasy or advanced fighting fantasy like system, which is not very well known, I don't think. And we never really so back then we had no idea about D&D. Then came some magazines in Hungarian, and then we saw, okay, so there's this D&D thing and there's this AD&D thing. I think around that time we had the sort of second edition of D&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and then we got our hands on 2 copies of that. So there was a long time where we were playing AD&D, and then there was a hiatus when we went to university, pretty much our separate ways, and even high school. Gab and I were in a different high school, and I did have some RPG with him as well and with others as well, but somehow it diverted. Anyway, then we encountered 3.5 and 3.0 D&D, and I thought, some of this would actually work better for the setting, because by then the setting was kind of coming together, and I sort of I took some things from AD&D, and then I took other things, more systems from D&D 3 and 3.5, and then sort of mashed them together, and that's what we played. And I think even today, if we play role-play games or campaigns or whatever adventures in the Riven Realms, which is quite rare nowadays, unfortunately, then it's kind of like a 3.5 D&D, with some elements taken from fresher editions like Advantage and things that I kind of thought worked well, and also a magic system that's a bit peripheral, which is like, it was not in any kind of main publications, but then it ended becoming True Magic. I think that's what it's called in the 3.5 era. So yeah, it's kind of a mixture of things that we found that we like.
And in my understanding, you've been the GM most of the time shaping Riven Realms, or have there other players taking the mantle at some points, everybody building something more than their characters and backstories, let's say?
There were other GMs in our groups, because there were several, but nobody has ever GM'd in the Riven Realms, among those people. So whenever they took over as a GM, we usually played something else, usually Shadowrun, or there was a Hungarian sort of homage to D&D, let's just call it that, that was very popular here. Magus, that a lot of my friends wanted to play, and I did not really. So whenever we played that, they were the GM. And then other stuff as well, Star Wars RPG. But yeah, Riven Realms, it was only me, and it was my kind of thing. And I was quite surprised that my group of friends and group of players kept coming back to that. It's like, they continue. It's like, okay, that was fine, but now let's go back to the Riven Realms. That was pretty cool, and so that's how it sort of developed from campaign to campaign.
So I assume the lore texts and all that stuff that exists in your website, I tried to see if there was any signature. I didn't see any. I assume all of those were your internal lore texts, world building notes.
Yeah, so the articles that are on vagrus.com and elsewhere, probably shared, are all, were written by me. Some of them were reviewed by other writers or editors, but yeah, that's all my stuff. And the game, a fair amount of the game, Vagrus, is also my own writing. In one of my roles at the company, I am the lead narrative designer and lead writer as well, which was very easy to attain in the beginning because there was only me doing that stuff. But then later on, other writers came in. But yeah, the everything has to go through me. For better or worse, I have to. I am the big sort of like the big bad of the IP. I own it, and I also am responsible for keeping it the way we like it, basically.
Mm-hmm. And how many people from the team that you were playing have become part of the Lost Pilgrims journey?
I think it's only Gabor. I do believe so.
As an active working member, that's just me. We had periods of time then some of the other folks were helping out with various stuff or even invested in the company. So there were connections elsewhere, but the two of us are really full-time committed to this from that
Okay. You already spoke a bit, Gabor, for the idea of the founding of the company and some of the first steps. Based on my research, you were founded around 2017, and I first noticed the existence of the project around 2018. And that was a trip down memory lane, actually, because the FIG campaign website is no longer active. You cannot find the data from that period easily. But if I remember correctly from our interview at the time, the FIG campaign was around 2019. Can you walk us a bit through these couple of early years before you had the FIG campaign?
Yeah, sure. So, like we touched upon, it was 2017 when I quit one of the last role I had at a multinational, and that was, I think, around July, maybe May, and that's when I spent a month just dedicated to calculations and like coming up with a plan and really trying to convince Geri to join me. And I think in July he resigned at his role at another firm as well. And then we started really in August, late August, September. We got through recommendations, a coder who started to lay the foundations of the game while we were working on really a first draft, first game design document. putting together like what we want to deliver as the game. And yes, we founded the company, so that was a bit later, at the end of 17. And the first post we probably posted in 18, as you mentioned, and that's when you noticed them. So you were really quite early in joining our fandom. Then we produced our first sort of demo and published it before the Christmas period in 18. That's where some others noticed this as well, most notably Nucleum, who was already, in our eyes, a big streamer. At the time, he had like, I don't know, 20,000 followers. It's like really 8 years ago. So, and we were extremely happy with him playing the game, and that gave it a boost. I think we published it first on Game Jolt and itch.io. And then following that, the success of that, we had the FIC campaign in 19. I think it was April, May, maybe, sometime around that.
In February, we had an interview 2019, and it wasn't up yet.
Yeah,
I can tell you that much.
we were, I think, we're already negotiating. It was a new kind of campaign with this whole open access thing where we already provide a playable demo. During that time, Discord had gaming, right? So we were pushing our builds on Discord, and our fans were playing through Discord. Well, that disappeared. But still, it was a fun experience. It was really a close-knit community that we built there. The early supporters through the FIC campaign, you could really immediately jump in and just play it and then share their feedback. It was really, really nice period.
Before we continue to the early access and release, I would like to ask you some technical design questions. First of all, how large is Riven Worlds actually? Is that only the place we see in the full map of the video game, and you decided to opt out of a smaller region out of that big map? Is there a map outside of those maps? We have some teases already in game about other continents and such. So what was the decision process behind, okay, let's make it this region in particular?
Oof. Okay. Getting to the interesting stuff. All right. So
that's why I wanted to chat with you.
I know. It's interesting. I grant you that. I mean, for those who are, interested in the Riven Realms. Okay. Let me try to. Okay. So first of all, there are 2 known continents in the Riven Realms, but you heard it here first. There's at least 4. It's kind of, you never kind of, whenever you are building these fictional worlds, there's always this notion of always cool to think about what's beyond the horizon, even as a world builder. And then maybe you think, oh, there's something over there, and I just have a vague idea about it. So let's just say that there can be a number of landmasses. They were never really developed. 2 are fairly well developed, and those 2, the inhabitants of the 2 landmasses that we know and that I have been game mastering campaigns on for decades now. Those people on these 2 continents have only vague sort of like hunches or like ideas about other continents, because if you're a big lore buff for Vagrus or the Riven Realms, you might know that the Sharduk people, who essentially invaded the empire right before the calamity, which then made the continent of Zerine, this post-apocalyptic sort of like cursed realm, So the Shardu people came from somewhere in the east, and they don't even know. They have like recollections of traveling on these huge, like almost city-sized ships that they don't remember building, and then they sort of just like were adrift on the seas and the oceans for they don't even remember how long, but probably years. And then they just sort of just crashed into the continent of Zerine. But they had to have come from somewhere, right? So there are these bits and pieces, and of course I do have some idea of what those places are. But two main continents are developed. From those, the continent of Zerine is where the Riven Realms is set. Well, essentially, the Riven Realms is a sort of alternative name for that continent. But there's another continent to the north of it, which the inhabitants of the Riven Realms only call the Green Continent out of sort of this misguided envy, because that continent was never devastated by a magical cataclysm. So it remains like fairly, livable. It has wonderful mountains and forests and plains and hills and deserts and jungles and whatnot. So it's a more classical sort of fantasy environment with more sort of classical or traditional fantasy tropes and kingdoms and realms and races. And it's about 3 times larger than Xerine. So it's a much larger continent. Xerine is a very important continent, but it's a relatively smaller sort of landmass compared to the big one that is the Green Continent. So those are the things that we knew these 2 continents could be settings for a game. But then we very quickly selected the Riven Realms, and the reason is, I guess, I think it's mostly the fact that it's not your typical classical sort of traditional high fantasy setting. It has a lot of dark fantasy elements. It does have a lot of hard fantasy elements, and it's sort of like this dark post-apocalyptic-ish sort of environment was we thought was more compelling and also better suited to the game that we wanted to make. At least, initially the plans were already set that this could be a caravan game where you're, like leading people, either mercenaries or some sort of a trade caravan. And the post-apocalyptic setting of the Riven Realms, especially the northern regions, which are more desolate and thus require the trade of a Vagrus or the Vagrai to sort of sustain a lot of things. That was an environment that we picked. And well, initially, and this is, you heard it here first as well, initially we did toy with the idea that maybe the whole continent of Zerine could be explorable in the game. But that was back when the design of the game was really in a very sort of like early stage, and we hadn't really done scoping up to that point, like, and we also haven't truly tested how deep the writing would go. And in that very early concept, we thought that this model, the sort of like the how the game would be played, would have less RPG in it. There would be fewer RPG elements. There would not be these very sort of like in-depth companions, long quest lines. It would have been a simpler game, and we probably should have stuck with that, right, Gabor? But no, of course not. And the reason why we sort of then moved away from this concept where, sure, the physical space that you could have explored would have been larger, but the things you would find there would not be that, this developed, or you would never have had this much lore on things. But the reason why we moved towards a more detailed model with more text and more quests and stuff like that, because the first people that we presented our sort of prototype to really enjoyed the kind of quests and reading and lore and stuff that we had there, and that was on the heavier side. And once we thought, we came to a conclusion that, okay, so we should, a lot of people that we showed this to really like this, but to make this open world with such level of detail, there's no way in hell the whole continent will be, traversable. That just won't work. We would need like 15 years to write everything to the standard of the level of like textual depth. So we had to pick some place, and even after we did that, we sort of had to rethink it several times during the early phase of development. Like, is this space gonna be small enough to have a deliverable video game? Because really, like, sometimes you had to write like cities worth of text to sort of like sell that this is a living game. And so this is how we shifted toward the more in-depth stuff, but a smaller area. And we picked the jagged waste and the searing plains and all the kind of like surrounding, basically everything between the Dragonlands and the Seepis Mountains and maybe the Forlorn Waste up top. So we picked that area because that was the most developed through our campaigns, and that we also saw the most sort of like the opportunities to sort of develop the region for a trading gameplay.
I want to come now to the demo and the early access, but I need to ask you this I want to ask you this for 2 years now.
Oh, sure.
Have you read the Malazan series?
Gabor has. He gave a copy of the first novel to me, saying you have to read this because it is it pretty much is in a very similar vein to your setting or our setting. And then I said absolutely, and then I haven't got to that, but I can see it now on my shelf. It's in a very important position. I do want to begin reading it, but it's just like these long series, because I know that if I start, I will read everything. They need a sort of investment that I've been postponing for now, but I'm really interested in that.
I'm mentioning that because I wanted to read Malazan for years. It seemed like the thing that I would enjoy. I didn't. I played Vagrus in 2021 when it got released. I played years of Vagrus. I played even, I think, the first expansion before reading Malazan, and just happened at some point to say, okay, I need to read Malazan because reasons. And I was reading it, and since I've played Vagrus first, in my head, they're the same world.
Oh, nice. Interesting. Okay.
Like, this is... The names are different, but this is in the world of Vagrus in my mind.
Interesting. I do.
That's how similar they are. That's why I wanted to ask at some point whether you were influenced, perhaps, unwittingly by it or some way. But yeah,
no, not one bit. There's a lot of influences on the Riven Realms. Unfortunately, Eriksson is not one of them because I haven't gotten around to reading him. But one of these days, yeah, sure. I do appreciate the sentiment, though. It is really cool to be compared to such a wonderful, awesome writer that he is. I'm sure, but I'm more guilty of the Black Company Chronicles.
Sure,
so that's the one. But even that I read pretty late. By then, the setting was fairly well developed. So. Yeah.
It was merely, especially from the Malazan perspective, it was really interesting to me that to way lore heavy series, because I consider Vagrus series as well in some capacities with the expansion as well, but in different areas. Like one is a video game, one is a book series, but both came from really developed tabletop RPG backgrounds. And as a lover of lore, of creating, of creative writing, it always came to me like, okay, see how much of development and knowledge can be in preparing what is essentially a game at home with some friends that can spawn such a big creative project, like a full video game with like thousands upon thousands of lines of text, or a 10 plus book series, alongside the actual, of course, low fantasy in some aspects, really gritty setting. Okay, let's go into the early access slash the demo. If I remember correctly, they both came out around the same time. This prologue demo. Can you walk me a bit through, first of all, the idea of this demo structure being an once and done small story to present the world, present the mechanics, how this demo came to be?
Yeah, so multiple things to it. So one, that was sort of our prototype. That was like, oh, we are not ready to just jump into the open world main campaign. It's from a development point of view. But also we thought, okay, we need to introduce this setting, and doing so in an open world where you can go anywhere, it's hard to really make sure that you give all the pointers about like what's this setting is about, what to set the tone, really the tone of the setting. So Gary thought, okay, let's have just a tutorial story. And I think at the beginning we thought like, okay, maybe 1 hour, that stops. And he just kept saying, yeah, I need to add this to the story. I need to add more. We need to finish the Avernum story. And then there needs to be a chase. And I was like, are you sure this is like still 1 hour? Like, dude, you punched in 100,000 words already. There's like, anyone just the reading part is way more than an hour. But we went with it, and it became really almost a separate game. I think in the days and from a perspective of first time indie developers, it could have been a game itself. But we were ambitious. We said, okay, we are too old to start really small projects and build up. Let's go all in. This is our demo. This is what we test with and really learn how to go about game development. I think we made a lot of mistakes with it, and we had to learn through that process. And then when we were done with it, went on to the main campaign, and that happened already in the open access. I think with the FIG campaign, this whole open access campaign, we started just with that Pilgrims of the Wasteland story. Halfway through, we added Torzak's Shelter and added, I think, Devon, so a few more. And then early access, we already separated out the demo, released it during the Steam Demo Fest, and that was sort of a ramp up and hype up. And I think within a month, we released the early access game itself, the main campaign, with the main campaign included. It was a rough start. It was because we thought, at least, we got so much feedback from our FIG community. There were really dozens of very involved people, but hundreds overall playing it. And they were used to the rough edges of the game, so to say. They knew how hard it was at the beginning and how we thought we eased it up. And when it actually the new audience on Steam met the game, well, they were not that forgiving about the difficulty. So we had to give in many aspects. But we kept our ground overall, I think. So it's still not a specifically easy game. But yeah.
If you could describe the period of the early access until the final release, how would you describe it? How did you pass that period?
Just to continue on the previous thought, so it was about feedback first. So a different crowd, a much bigger crowd, giving us feedback. There was a tough call about regional pricing. I'm gonna bring it up. So not to enable regional pricing immediately, because we had so much feedback. We received really thousands of bug tickets, everything, and we were so flooded. We said we are not going to be able to deal with this. We are a small company. We cannot do it, and a very big chunk of that came from folks who were not native, so they had less chance, obviously, to understand the game. And we always said, at the time of full release, when we are ready and the game is ready for you, we are going to enable regional pricing, but we need to limit the number of. We actually tried to limit the number of players during early access because we were so overwhelmed. We were really underprepared to release at that time. We didn't know. We thought we were ready. Anyhow, we quickly learned that what we expected as priorities, what we thought were the priorities, were not matching what people felt. So, like we were initially thinking, okay, we need to add this and this and that to the combat, and everyone was saying they need an easier market and managing their finances in the game, and so we had to turn back to adding trade jobs through the factions, which was a plan to add it, but the priorities shifted. Okay, make sure that the players can keep playing, and then provide us with feedback on that and things like that. So we really took in the feedback from players and tweaked the game in many ways that made it better.
And fast forward to the actual release, which was in 2021, if I remember correctly, around October, September, somewhere like that.
Yeah.
When the release happened, what was the feeling and the feedback received?
That was an interesting period as well. Well, just leading up to it, the release, we already set the release. We were not going to postpone it any further because of finances. We were after COVID, which really canceled our investment round that was supposed to happen. So we were low on finances on one end, but also like we spent so much time, so much energy on the game, and that was a really for Geri and myself especially a crunch period right before the release. We pushed really hard to make it in time and be ready with everything, and as usual underestimated the producer tasks of like marketing and everything around the game, and just we went in with a few, well, let's just say huge bugs. So the first few weeks, even after the release, were really bad. We felt really bad because last minute we got in some big bugs that impacted the release surely. Because we saw it on the reviews, we saw the video coverage from creators, and it wasn't good. I mean, just looking at it, and it felt painful to watch how screens got messed up and they got soft locked. So we learned a lot from that as well. But then at the same time, there was a relief and like a joy of releasing something to the public to to everyone. There was a lot of positive feedback as well, so we cannot complain about that. And I can mention it here. Like, we had discussions with publishers along the way, and some of them were before our full release, and they said like, "Oh, you released into early access already, so that means you released the game. There's not gonna be any bump. It's a done deal already. So forget your 1.0. It's nothing." And we said, "No, we believe we can like make this happen," and we did make it happen. So our 1.0 was way bigger than our early access release. So it was a good strategy to keep our independence and believe in ourselves. And we can see it on all the DLCs, right? So we did not imagine producing this much, but okay.
We'll get to those in a bit. And how about you, Geri? How was it after release, seeing all those people playing around in your playbooks, essentially, letting you know about the writing and all that stuff?
Very difficult to describe this feeling, because as someone who's been working on the setting and on stories and have been telling stories, which has become my passion, even way before I ever got into development with Gabor and the small team that we started out with. I always, this is something I think a lot of people who are in a similar shoe think about, like, what would it feel like to have a larger audience? Because up until that point, sort of my audience was one group of friends, and then there was another group of friends, and then maybe there was a third group, but mostly like I kept telling stories to these people, and the people changed, of course, over the decades. But some of them stayed, and that was it. And then I did write some stuff, but then I never felt like maybe I don't want to present it. But then with this, there came a moment, I remember. I think it was before the crunch, so it was after the early access period, but then before the big lead up to the October release. So maybe around the spring of that year, when it suddenly hit me that, ooh, now it's just like out there. It's gonna be out there. It's a lot of people are gonna see it, and what if it's bad? What if it doesn't work? Because along the way, a lot of times, you feel like, even during early access, that the feedback comes in and it's like, not everybody likes this. maybe people won't like it. Maybe people will hate this. And not just the gameplay, but the whole sort of like the writing part, which was more sort of my field. But there's also a huge sense of accomplishment, not because, oh, I did something amazing, but because we overcame this particular hurdle of, is it gonna be good enough? Is it gonna call to people? Is it gonna reach people? But even these days, whenever reading reviews, which I tend to do, I really love how a lot of people write like amazing things and very good criticism as well, which is like great to read. And then I feel like, oh, okay, so it did accomplish something. It was not for nothing, which is a really happy thing. And I'm really grateful to our players, very vocal players, and also the silent ones, because there's a lot more of those who are just having fun and end up playing dozens of hours, if not hundreds. So that's pretty cool. That's a great thing. It makes it worthwhile, the whole undertaking, I think.
Going to the subject of the DLCs we touched a bit upon, correct me if I'm wrong here. If I remember correctly, up to the Sunfire and Moonshadow DLC, it was announced or pre-announced as part of the early access or the fee campaign, or am I wrong here? Because I think I remember the Sunfire and Moonshadow DLC being teased for years before it came out.
I don't know when we started to tease with it. I know that the first two DLC. 3 LCs were Vorax and the Seekers of Knowledge, which added a new winning condition with knowledge.
These were on 2022. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was 22, and that's when we started to develop Sunfire and Moonshadow. And it took a long time to develop it because it was just a huge area. And
so let's start a bit then from the free DLCs. What were you considering when you said, okay, we need to have this extra victory condition, the knowledge condition, and an extra character as a free DLC at that?
We were considering two things. A, we always wanted a knowledge winning condition. So it was part of the plan. We could not deliver it by the full release, but we still wanted to add it. We also had this idea about Vorax. So that idea about him was, and also we felt we need another frontline character who could really tank and soak up damage. So that was, but also there was a business decision behind it, meaning the base game is huge, so you can easily play 100 hours, even more, if you are a completionist, right? But it's natural that everyone wants even more. So if you give something, if you release a DLC, they will say, "Oh, why is it? This is on the same continent. Why was it not part of the main game?" So it's and there were already discussions about that, like, "Oh, is this all we are getting? This 100 hours from an indie game?" And we thought, okay, we want to give more, and these are things that are reasonable to add as free DLCs and start to build goodwill with these free DLCs, but also patches that corrected the game. We took in more things, optimizing the game, and so on. We kept going and built that audience that we have, that community, rather, I should say, that we have, that really stand behind the studio. I know that there are thousands of people who would buy pretty much anything we release because they believe that we have the quality and really the commitment to deliver something good. And that's what we built through those DLCs and patches and whatnot. And then we decided, okay, this is where we need to draw the line. And from this point on, we need to ask for money for additional content because it just costs a lot of money.
So when Sunfire and Moonshadow started as a project, can you walk us through a bit this period and thought process? I understand that you must have considered Vagrus base a success already in order to consider paid DLCs. So how did this process came to be like, okay, let's add a new area, and why this area in particular?
that is it me? Okay, so
anybody can start.
It's yeah, it's political, right? So you need to be careful what I say. No, well, we considered a number of regions. We had to make a decision not just about a region. We knew that people wanted more content, wanted more accessible area. So it was clear that eventually, after Vorax and Seekers of Knowledge, there would be a new region. But the question was which one, and we need to fit it into a larger plan of how that would look like in terms of if we look out for 2 or 3 DLCs. So even though it was a work starting on Sunfire and Moonshadow, we already knew that it was going to be followed by the companion DLC, and we would have something in between, because we would never release the Bronze Desert without eventually connecting it through Scrap Heap, really that area. So it wasn't like we were going to add the Bronze Desert and then eventually thinking, oh, what if we connected it? We knew that it was going to happen. The question rather was why? What's the order of things? We also toyed another region, but that felt too stable, too different to everything else. It wasn't that easily added. So
is it the Dragonlance?
yeah, it wasn't. It was the region of the Black Dragon, so Dracmolok. So that's a different one. But we could not connect it really. It would have been really hard to connect it with the main world. So we thought, okay, the two regions are more the Bronze Desert and the Molten Kingdom. And I recall, even after almost starting to work on it, it was the Molten Kingdom, because it was a natural next step. It's an extension. It immediately connects with the mainland, right? We already had Scrap Heap in the Pilgrims of the Wasteland story. But that was also the trap, like what I said to Geri at the time. If we go with that first, we just give fuel to the claim that, oh, Scrap Heap was already in the game, sort of. So giving it as a DLC, having to pay for it another time, how would that look, right? And also we felt, okay, just alone Scrap Heap and that area, Ararbarak, it's too small. So we would need to climb up the mountain, but that would require a different kind of mechanic. Like, do we know how that would look like? We had no idea. Okay, so those two things led to the decision. Let's go with the Bronze Desert, which is a bit like more of the same, so closer to the original gameplay. You can be really a trader. There are shifting alliances. We introduced a nemesis system between the Ahari and the Legate. So there was a new thing as well introduced. We added oil and everything. So it had unique flavors, but it was more closer in terms of production to what was going on with Vagrus, the base game. So that's how we ended up starting with that.
That might be a question alongside the At the Heart of Ruin, but what was the thinking behind the portal system? Because both DLCs start with going through portals and essentially being thrown in the middle of things. Was that because of technical issues, story issues, a bit of both? Geri, perhaps you can talk this time.
Sure. I think more what Gabor was saying. Following up on that,
logistics.
The logistics of it. So once it was clear that the two, because remember we also kind of sort of promised two DLCs during the FIG campaign, and although few people would have held us to that, it was still the right thing to do, and also we wanted to do it, and also it seemed like a good financial sort of plan as well. Seemed like underlined, but yeah, we were really crazy about the idea. Okay, yeah, let's. And people were asking like, can we have more of this? Like, so there was a good audience, and so, like Gabor said, the decision fell on two specific DLC areas: the Bronze Desert and the sort of like the foot of the Mountains of Fire. And then, even back then, we had some sort of an inkling about going up the mountains and maybe under them, but that was less developed in our heads. So once the decision, was to go with the Bronze Desert first, it does not connect directly with the main game area. So then we had to find a way to get the players there. And some players were also asking about the Outer Realms. And so Gabor, I think that was his idea. It's like, why don't we have them visit the Outer Realms, which is basically these outer planes of existence where the gods used to be, and now they are sort of like these malleable, whatever, endless places where the building materials of the world, the essence just flows, and everything's magic and whatever. So why don't we give a glimpse to players, but then also use it as a sort of a staging ground for all future regional DLCs to be accessed. And I thought it was a fantastic idea because it utilized the setting, because it does happen in the setting that people travel through realm gates or these portals essentially, but it's neither cheap nor simple to do, so it's not a common thing. But it also would give a good look at the a teeny tiny bit of the outer realms, more of a feel to it, because let's face it, Kadaf and whatever people are holed up there is just like not a very typical place in the outer realms, but it does work. And it also sort of solved the problem of how do people get to the Bronze Desert without physically crossing overland there, and then they could get back. And it also solved the problem of, well, what happens when someone has been playing a campaign for 150 hours, 200 hours, a completionist person? Now there's a DLC. It can be accessed after a amount of time during a campaign, but not a huge investment, like maybe 10, 12, 15 hours. You have a couple of companions, you have some fun stuff, and then the opportunity presents itself to go to the outer planes, which then opens into DLC areas. But how is this going to be a challenge for those players who have been playing for a long while? And then Gabor said, well, the portals, have that's how it works in the world, right? In the setting, the portals are can be accessed a few people at a time, and then you don't have the resources to open them up continuously. And that solved the problem of like going to the new area with like a huge army of like the best sort of like crew and stuff like that. So you had to like find your footing there, rebuild, get that sense of, oof, this is like a harsh setting where I have to now rebuild again. So it was a very clever thing, we think, that solved a lot of our problems with or challenges with the DLC and how to get people there. And then we thought, okay, this can work again with Scrap Heap as well, because yes, Scrap Heap is physically reachable from the main game area, but the Voiceless Lake and the whole sort of like path that you have to like thread the needle there, it's not a simple thing in the setting or in world. If you remember, or if players remember, the big part of the Pilgrims of the Wasteland scenario, the sort of like the prologue / tutorial storyline, is what the main character of that story attempts, who you play as. That person, he attempts to go along that path between the Desert of Black Sands and the volcanic sort of like deadly lava lakes. And that's not something that most people would normally do. Most people would never try that path. So essentially, Scrap Heap is very much cut off to the south. It's 100% cut off to the east because of the Dead Forest. So the only access, really the convenient, quote-unquote, access to Scrap Heap used to be the bridge that connected it to the Land of Shadows and Kabur to the north, which we destroyed in this period of time of the world. So really the portaling in also was necessary for Scrap Heap. And then there's an extra added benefit of this. After visiting the DLCs and then completing a lot of important quests, you can actually physically connect the three areas: the main game, the Bronze Desert, and the mountains, through like repairing these paths or learning more about them, or unlocking essentially a guide to one of them. And it almost like sort of fell into place like a nice, neat little puzzle. But that's why we initially went with the portals. So there was, I've been speaking for a long while about this, but to summarize it, various reasons, both like logistically and design-wise, and also because we sort of like designed ourselves into not a corner, but into a place where we started with the Bronze Desert.
So right now we are at 2023. the Sunfire and Musado has been released. And the next two DLCs, Old Acquaintances and At the Heart of Ruin, came in consecutive years, 2024, 2025. Did they start did you start the design on both of them at the same time, or why did you decide to have the character DLC first? So what was the process behind those two?
Yeah, so we did know that these would be the 3 DLCs. We already had the season pass out, right? So at the time we released Sunfire and Moonshadow, the very same, we released the season pass. And we did say that this is what it's going to contain. And why is the order of things, why the companion DLC first? Well, Sunfire and Moonshadow, it's always with us, became way bigger than we originally anticipated and scoped. We wanted to switch it up after so much work on a region. Let's go with a smaller one. But also, from the beginning, we thought this would be a good idea. Region, companions, region again. So it made sense framing that way. And we thought, okay, the companion DLC will be just like a breeze, couple of months, that's it. It's a quickie. It wasn't even that got bigger than expected, but still, because of the limited scope, it could not creep as much as a region, and it really became a really high quality DLC, we think, and with very memorable characters. We had to solve this whole thing of the characters have to be mutually exclusive, because we have so many characters already. It's hard to balance the game with too many characters. It's just like there are no challenges. You can just switch them around and then get through anything. But also it meant from a lore perspective and how these characters really have a history, it made sense. So that's what came next. We added some flavor with the whole hiring new mercenaries kind of thing, the guild, and actually that's the only DLC that is close to being profitable. The regional DLCs are like haven't turned black yet, not even Sunfire and Moonshadow. But Old Acquaintance, in terms of effort that we had to put in and return, is closer.
From a lore perspective, before we move on from Old Acquaintances, you, Geri, was it thinking at first that let's use the characters from the prologue, or did this came out afterwards?
I have to be very careful with this, because a lot of people were saying, so Szutorisz and Jobbik, right? Why not just have them as characters? You must have had them already. And why did you just cut them out of the... And I can understand that suspicion somewhat. Although if you look into it, yes, we did have both of these characters in the Pilgrims of the Wasteland scenario. That was also the demo, this part of it, and also the sort of like the prologue stuff. And when I was writing that, Gabor and I were picking who the companions are going to be for the main game, which was in flux. So we were not entirely sure. We had some very, like, fairly certain positions who we wanted to have, but we also had some question marks with some characters. Also the number of companions. I remember saying, well, we have to have at least 20. And the guy was like, yeah, sure. No. That's too much. And as we were writing them, because it was not just me, it was like several other writers, mostly one more back then, Ivan, who was very essential in delivering everything on time with the vanilla game. And as we were writing them, we were like 20 is too much, 15 is too much. And then we settled on, like, let's have 10. And from that 10, when we were nearing the release of the vanilla game 1.0, I was like, I can't finish the 10th one on time. It's just impossible. And I think that's what we thought, like, maybe we'll have Vorax as a, because he was the 10th, we will have Vorax as a separate. But even before that, we knew that we want to have sort of like a tie back to the Pilgrims of the Wasteland story with Sedarius and Javak. I had this idea as I was writing Pilgrims of the Wasteland, that the way it ends, like, spoilers, one of them getting buried in the sand and left for dead, and the other one sort of rejecting everything and, like, bemoaning the death of an old friend, and then saying, like, I'm just gonna leave now, and then busting out some abolitionists and then running away with them. I thought, okay, these deserve a follow-up, and I wanted to have a follow-up. But as we were developing vanilla, they never really came up as like necessary companions, whereas the others were always like filling a role. And then we had discussions and we said, okay, so these two will definitely come because I planted the seeds of them. We planted the seeds for their return, and I, from the very beginning, wanted to have an undead companion. Then we ended up with 2, but we really wanted to have Sedarius return as an undead, partly also because he was a fairly important antagonist in our own tabletop games, and he was one of those characters that we felt like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if he showed up, and then we know that it's him, and then he has some developed background and stuff. But as we were developing vanilla, like, Javak and Sedarius were like, yeah, later on, because they are important, but we want to do them justice, and we're struggling to get the initial gang up and running, and then the decision came that, like Gabor said, like, at one point, it's like, they have to be like DLC, because you've worked so much on them. We've worked so much on them, like their background, their story, all this sort of interesting setup, and people will appreciate it. But that work, like, it can't be just it can't be just free LC. There's already a companion that's free LC and other stuff and continuous updates. So why don't we like improve the quality of these stories even more, make them bigger, make them more fulfilling, and then release it as DLC. So yes, their idea as a companion or companions was present back even in early access or pre crowdfunding days, but they ended up becoming full-fledged characters only later on.
That actually brought me a separate question to my mind. Out of all the cast, are there characters that were actually in the tabletop campaigns? Or are they all new, outside of Sedarius that you just mentioned?
From the companions or from every single character?
Companions mainly, I was thinking.
Sure. Yes. We have several, but not as many as some players would think, or because we've been talking to players about this, they keep asking this, and I tend to reply to the best of my knowledge, and I'll try that now. I am certain Gorgoro was an important character in our tabletop campaigns. So much so that, in fact, he started out as an NPC, but then someone took him over as a player character, and he went back to being an NPC. And then several players played him at various points in his life. But because our campaigns were like sometimes decades apart and something like that. Stories connected via characters or plot lines or something, or not at all, but some characters made cameos in them. Gorgoro was a very important guy, and ends up becoming an important person in the setting, sort of, towards his older age. But this was a prime opportunity because Vagrus is set sometime before most of our campaigns, and so of course it was a very attractive idea to have the past versions of these characters that we know. So he was one. Harvak is another person who shows up in in one of the stories, and then he has a role to play there. I'll just leave it at that. Not necessarily a very friendly role. Then Ren Kylon is only in the short story. I think that's where he's introduced. So not in the campaigns. Krifta isn't. She was completely new. Garrick is a character who shows up in several stories, the bastard, and he's usually in a villainous role. So it was very interesting to sort of have him as not a hero, definitely, certainly, but at least an ally, and sort of glimpse into his world of smuggling and betrayals and whatnot and heists. And then Finduroth was a completely new character. Nadir was an NPC, and I think she was an antagonist in some stories. She was a sidekick of an even more important character in some. Well, it doesn't matter. So Nadir, and then Skornar also shows up in a small capacity in some of these tabletop campaigns. And who else do we have? Vorax is entirely new. Sedarius, as I mentioned before, was an important antagonist and he's a recurring character for a long while. And Javek was also entirely new. So I think that rounds out the 12 characters. If I'm leaving someone out, apologies.
And that actually brought me to another separate question. I understand that you are a meticulous writer and try to connect the dots, but always when you're thinking, okay, I'm just playing a tabletop campaign with my friends, you always leave something in the air. Did actually making this a video game force you to actually go back and make a more detailed timeline of things or not?
Oh, yes. Because I did have a ton of maps that I really enjoy drawing maps. So I had maps and I had notes going back years and years and even decades, some of them in weird notebooks and exercise books and stuff where I kept like university notes. So I was like listening to whatever, like British literature on the side. I was like taking notes and like drawing characters and whatnot. Just, the usual GM thing. I'm sure that you know this very well. And I had to like gather all of this when we were, getting serious with the game development thing. Because I'm the kind of person who really likes like the kind of immersion that comes with a well-developed world. That's the kind of escapism that I enjoy. So naturally, I also build this kind of immersive kind of world. But immersion only works if it's like very detailed and it's coherent, right? This is not my wisdom. This is the wisdom of the very first writers of escapism. And so this has to be regulated and then re-examined sometimes. And sometimes you do make mistakes, which I'm dreading like these. Like I have to like go, even now Vagrus has so much text that I have to like go back and search stuff sometimes. Like, was this ever mentioned? And when I mentioned it, did I say something really dumb about it, or did I give away too much, or have I considered like, developing it into this specific direction that I now want to develop it? It's tricky. And when you don't have a whole staff of people to keep track of these things, like the top like fantasy writers, like let's say a George R.R. Martin, you don't have Wikipedias, you don't have interactive like databases, then kind of your own job to, as the keeper of the IP and the sort of the game master for the video game, to keep these in line. And yeah, I Jesus Christ, I had to like okay, so there's one document that details the first stage, and then there's one document that details the second stage. And then I realized I never ever really put numbers or dates or even like, never even really outlined them in such detail. So I did have to come up with a lot of these documents, specifically the first stage, or the fourth stage, definitely, the present age of the world.
So you could argue the encyclopedia is as much as for your sake as for the players.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Let's go to the At the Hearts of Ruin, the latest DLC. This came out late last year, and it was the last part, as you said, of the pre-order bundle. I forget right now the term.
Season pass. Yeah.
Season pass, yes. But can you walk us through a bit on that journey that led to the release last year?
Yeah. So after Old Acquaintances released, we immediately started on At the Hearts of Ruin. So we knew the area, we knew the first part. Geri had already an idea about what's the starting scene, how the character just really re-enters scrap heap, and there's something big happening, changes are happening, power shifts, power moves, who are the key players, and so on. And that's what we had. We also knew we wanted to work out the next region up in the mountain, Barnurud, which is more accessible, and have the gangs. There are many gangs in terms of lore, but also we were gathering from an artistic perspective, differentiate them enough, but make their unique quirks and like how they operate, what makes them really have their own flavor. And then, right, we need to turn this into a story that the players can experience. So how many of them will be actually available to become allies versus just really purely enemies as gangs, but still have their own flavor. So there was a lot of scoping work around that, and we went through several iterations. The biggest challenge was obviously mountaineering. We did know that because of immersion, we just have to make it. So everyone was saying like, "Oh, we have this caravan style already. Why just not go up with the mountain?" But that does not work. How would you? It's a mountainous area. It doesn't make sense to go up with 300 people, right? And all kinds of big mounts and beasts of burden. So we have to really cut down size to make sense, but also again a balancing act where we place it to make it a good experience even for Vagrus who've been like working. Building up their empire almost through many years in the game versus just ones who access the DLC area right away. So that was a challenge, and like we had to give it some thought of how it could work, be challenging enough, but also accessible still. And with Doomgarok, the factions there, how they would have their own challenges, and how the Vagrus is always like a lever, just like a small weight, and then just changing history, not through heroic and that big acts, but still incremental changes and helping one ally or another. So those decisions, how I think we can say that At the Heart of Ruins became the most replayable in one sense, because there are so many directions in terms of choosing from the three gangs that you can ally with, choosing from the factions, Doomgarok, and even the quest line that is being developed and released in these continuous patches. There are some alliances, sort of, maybe, that players can like how they react and how they approach things. So we originally really Varnurud and Doomgarok was the main thing, and then as usual with us, like we became greedy again. Like, oh, this is so close to, like, oh, we could do a new biome and like go underground. There could be a whole quest line about a big expedition with the dwarves, and like this is the time if we ever want to do it. This is the DLC. But guys, this has been like developed for over a year already. We need to release it. We cannot interfere with the AAA in Q4. We can add, okay, That's the deal. We can add that big quest line, but that's outside, like that's free patches. That's how we add it, and that's what we did. So we released it, and then we keep adding to it because we just want to.
I want to touch on the free patches. Up to this date, I think a couple days ago from recording, you released yet another update on the DLC with another part of the story. How do you take into consideration this? In my eyes, it's more like an episodic release right now. How do you think about Geri from a storytelling perspective? Do you have a saying, okay, let's cut this best in this story bit and then we release the other story bit? Or is there another consideration in there?
So initially, I think our idea was to not cut this up, but to, whenever it's done fully, because we saw a definite ending at certain point. We knew where it was going, and we have known how it's supposed to end from the early days of At the Heart of Ruin. Whenever we had the concept and the idea of the expedition, and we sort of like came up with the story beats, and then it became something. We already knew where it was going. So that ending is something that we wanted to reach, and then we sort of like had to develop all the paths to it. But initially we thought, okay, so we can't have it in the release because it's already too much. But then we release it after the fact, and I think the consideration to make it episodic was more about the benefits of such a schedule, of like, whenever we release such a content drop, for the lack of better word, new part of the story, and players get excited again, especially if it's paired with something else. It sort of boosts the visibility of the game as well. So that was the idea, and then a couple of points in the story sort of very easily presented themselves as convenient points to cut it, up to segments or episodes, and it's a kind of a necessity because of that. But then also, where exactly these cuts are, mostly Gabor and I, this is a conversation between the two of us that keeps on going. It's like, it's not a big secret that these points can move because like we figure out this will take too long, or maybe it looks better if we cut it here because it's like physically separated from that part. There are points where we can feasibly make cuts, but that are also kind of satisfying sort of like progressions of the story. So yeah, it's not so much because of lore, but because of other factors. But there's a great, and I don't think I've told this to Gabor yet either. I think there's because I just one of these days I was thinking about this, that there's a big advantage to this, which is that each of these segments are play tested and taken apart segment by segment, and I can be more reactive, and the writing team can be more reactive to whatever we find. So interestingly, if we were to deliver this like as of one big sort of like, and here's the expedition, I think it would have been a nightmare to QA that. It's just a lot, and also very sort of like complex. So I actually am glad that it happens in an episodic way, because there's more control, and maybe there's something to look forward to as a player.
At the time of recording, has the story been finished, or is there a part remaining of the expedition?
Let's see. I think there's 2 more parts coming. So there's some to go. not all of these segments are created equally. Well, I'm saying 2 parts, but Gabor might then say maybe let's just finish it in one go. Again, like this is a conversation.
But it's not finished. Where is my getting at? It's not finished as of today.
No, not written. No. We're constantly working on it. Now this part has been out, or is just out basically, and for a while I've been working on the next part now, and so this
I'm asking because I want to bring now to the start of the conclusion, the discussion, with even though the last DLC is not finished yet, you still have some story threads to close. It's been almost 9 years since the start of this journey, close to 10. You still are actively working on the same project, the same world, the same storytelling thread, which is arguably, on my experience as a blog, because you start the company right around the time I started the blog. I started the blog in June 2017, so we've been around the same year. So I've not seen another developer, indie game developer, commit so many years on the same world, the same project, and still continue, and still be active, and not just disappear off the face of the earth after the launch, if the first DLC, and if that. If right now, as you sit back and take the time to think a bit about it, what are your takeaways of your journey so far? Let's start with you, Gabor.
I don't need to think about it. We are crazy. We are crazy to do this. We did not know what we were getting into, and that's, I think, the greatest thing, because Vagrus and the setting would have never been developed if we knew how much effort and really sometimes sort of pain to go through that we had to was about to happen. But we always made it work. So there were really hard times about it, and sometimes we doubted our direction, but came through. So, and it's been a great journey in terms of like switching up that life at multinationals, working for the big man versus working on our own thing, and really influence how we go about things. Yeah.
And what about you, Geri?
It might be a weird perspective, but my sort of perspective is that, yeah, it's the same project, appears to be, but it sort of it changed so much that you can consider like the sort of like Pilgrims of the Wasteland as one project, certainly, because that's how it was, and then the vanilla game another one, and bits and bobs were attached to that. But then I think Sunfire was definitely a project of its own, because it was a huge expansion. It was developed as long as some games are developed, and then now At the Heart of Ruin, which has this afterlife of sort of like the added episodic content and all the additional stuff. So these, I believe, in my eyes, are sort of different game projects. And so if you consider that like maybe it's almost been 9 years, but it's almost like 4 projects, then it sounds much better and we seem less insane. As for the setting, I can never get tired of the setting. I love the setting, and there's so much in this setting that it's that part, and it's a blessing, I think. That part is never boring to me. Coming up with new stories and introducing like stuff and developing this world on and on, it's cool. What my takeaway is that perhaps the format that is Vagrus, which is very heavily text-based, might be detrimental to storytelling in a strange way. It's like when you have to describe everything, you often get into this grind, and then you have to write a ton of texts that are not that super interesting, but they have to be there because because these texts, these kind of texts were written from the beginning. So my big takeaway is yes, maybe we could have shifted gears earlier, but then again, we promised the DLCs, and then we had fun making them. So I don't know. The big takeaway is we should have done this earlier, Gabor. We should have left these corporate jobs, and then we should have gotten into this earlier. But I also know that was not possible because we were just not ready, mentally and whatever else.
Yeah.
We had to convince ourselves and a lot of other people that we were meant to do this, or maybe not meant to do this, but that we should do something with this.
And from that point, first of all, I would like to argue a bit because I really consider the big texts worth it. I grew up playing a lot of games and I do enjoy, like, Vagrus hits that weird sense in my mind, like the sandbox of a Mountain Blade, but with the big reading points of a Sunless Sea, which I really enjoy. I can't imagine a Vagrus without all the texts. Granted, though, when I play Vagrus, I have to stop reading books because I consider this reading a book and playing a game at the same time, so I have to juggle. But I think I heard some type of tease in what you said, Geri. So, closing up this interview, what is next for Lost Pilgrims and perhaps the Riven Realms as well? Let's have you, Gabor.
So, we kind of alluded to things like, yeah, this format is not working in the sense that it takes a lot of time and effort to produce versus it has a limited audience. It's a niche game still, in that sense. So that presents one challenge, but also writing this much and being delivered with this pace is hard, and we think maybe different format could work better. But it's always like we first cannot start dreaming. We first need to finish our job, and that is we want to round out this whole DLC, and with that, what we promised in the season pass. So that's we cannot take our eyes off that ball, because if we start to do things parallel, then nothing will work, right? So that's the first thing. And then we will most likely start to entertain the idea of a new game. So we will need to prototype. We will, with the setting, it's no question that it's going to be in the same setting. It's going to take place in Xerine. It's going to have less text. I'm going to spoiler that. So that's something to take away throughout the 9 years, is that how to make the game a bit more accessible. Still, before we get there, I'm pretty sure Geri will insist on finishing some bits and pieces in various parts of the game as well, because we want to really round it out before starting to move on. We'll see how that goes, what we find enjoyable, a good topic, good place and scope for the game. So it will take some time. And even once we do that and start to develop, it will even further out when we can actually start to share anything about it. So it would be cruel to start to tease anything now. We'll see how it goes. So first, really, this year we need to work on Vagrus and just finish it, right?
So, if I may dig a bit deeper here, as far as Vagrus specifically is concerned, outside of finishing up the expedition storyline, is there anything else to be expected, or is that it for the time being?
For the time being, probably that's it. I don't see any I don't know unless there's a divine intervention. I don't know there to keep going with this format. Like I said, even after the DLC, might be smaller things to close, maybe quest lines or just put them in the air better. So that's going to come, and maybe some improvements. But I think after that we gotta start working and really figuring out the next game.
So it would be like a plan of finishing up Vagrus by, let's say, the end of 2026 or something like that?
Yep. That's pretty much the plan.
And for you, Geri, a question on that subject. How do you feel about shaking up the creative juices on a different format from a writing perspective, at the very least, compared to what we've been doing over the past several years now with Vagrus?
Oh yeah, that's what I think. That's what I was referring. No, that's what I was referring to, and that's what Gabor was also referring to. That when we say that less text, we don't mean fewer stories or not as much storytelling. We want, again, like, who knows? But I don't see ourselves suddenly coming up with a platformer where there are only cute characters speak mumbling lines. I love those games, but that's not something that would. So again, the setting is there. So the setting and the kind of dark fantasy, sort of like gritty storytelling that we kind of prefer.
Isn't it gritty to have Goro Goro jump on top of Jagas and in a platform sense?
That would be an interesting one. Yeah. Or a dating sim with all your favorite companions. But to be a bit more serious about, yeah, sure. So because we have the setting, and the setting is our best asset probably, and we also love creating in the confines of the setting. That's sort of whatever a next game is going to be. It has to lean into the sort of like the strengths of the setting, and so it certainly will have a lot of story, characters, just probably not the caravan stuff, because I think whatever we had to say about leading a group of like traders and whatever people, I think we managed to say. And also the part where every single description is written, that's where we would like to cut back from, as in more storytelling with environments and visuals, and like usually less text heavy video games do, but still keep the sort of the RPG elements and the heavy narrative elements. Just like have some of the sort of like the groundwork of like setting scenes and stuff not being done in a text format, because that's what takes extremely long, and that is what limited the sort of reach of Vagrus, as in reach of audience, but also our limits in like producing sizable chunks of content that will then be also commercially relatively successful to keep this company afloat. So there has to be a sweet spot somewhere. The heavy text format was also a kind of a crutch, because we had a writer, me, in the beginning, and then we had other writers chipping in and working a lot on these texts, but by then the format was set in stone, and so we couldn't deviate. And maybe concentrating on more interesting writing and leaving the least interesting parts to art assets and visuals and environments. That's my dream of sort of like a new kind of format, which is pretty much industry standard, by the way.
I understand if you opt out of answering this question, but is this a chance perhaps to see some other region outside of the continent of Zerine, or is it still undecided?
It's undecided, but one would entertain trying to have a bit of both worlds, right? We'll see what we land on. But if we were to guess, yeah, a bit of this that we know so we can tie it, but show something new as well. That's just like basic business approach as well. Like, what would people want? They would want some of the old to have that nostalgia of, oh, I heard about this, knew this character, this is something. But also they like new stuff. So if we can find that.
And since I understand more news are coming up soon-ish, where can people follow you to keep up with all the news and updates you have?
Yeah. So actually, it was yesterday when the new patch came out with Journey in the Dark, the second part of it. We also were part of Steam's daily deal. So a lot of new people just jumped onto Vagrus. So that's a good thing. And we enabled some languages, got some new mods. So it's a good surge right now for Vagrus. So it's a good time to join in. Our Discord community is quite active. There are a lot of hardcore players, really just with us from the beginning, who knew. I almost feel like they know more about the game than I do. So they are really resourceful, and they can advise new players, and they're really nice. But also, some people prefer to just we regularly check our Steam forums and so on. Are on all the social media platforms, so we tweet. I don't know. There's X, Blue Skies, Instagram, whatnot. So any of those, if you look for Lost Pilgrims or Lost Pilgrim Studio on some, you will find us. But easiest perhaps to go on vagrus.com, and all the links are there.
And all the links will also be as part of the description of this podcast episode. So anybody who wants to check it up can easily do so. And this brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you very much to both of you for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you after all these years of playing Vagrus. Arguably one of my top 10 games, if not top 5, that I've covered in my blog all these years. Those types of games that really remind me, yeah, that's why I'm playing indie games in the at first. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much, everybody, and see you on the next episode of the Into the Indies podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.